Hi friend, David here from Learn Stage Lighting, and today I want to answer your burning questions, actually Mike's burning questions. I thought it would be fun to sit down for a minute here and talk about how I first got started with lighting, help you to get to know me a little better. So Mike, one of my lab students and gear customers as well, recently bought some stuff. Hope you don't mind that, Mike. And we also gave away, actually in the labs, a giveaway that Mike won. So boom, double right there. But hey, Mike wrote in and said, hey David, I want to hear a little bit more about your beginnings with lighting. I want to hear about what you worked with first, what your first job was, things like that. So hey, I thought, I got a couple minutes. Let's knock this out, make a video so everybody can hear. So how did you first get started with lighting? That's the first question. I got started with lighting actually by way of audio. I got started with audio by way of PowerPoint. PowerPoint? Yeah. So the short answer, the short version of it is that my brother in youth group at the church we were at growing up in, he started volunteering with the sound and the PowerPoint. That's what we called it back then, the lyrics on the screen, because yes, we used PowerPoint. We copied and pasted the songs together every week. It was kind of ugly. He got started with that, and he was into computers and stuff, and the other guy who did it was into that kind of stuff. My brother got drawn into that, started volunteering, okay? At some point, not long after he started, I learned about that, hey, he was started doing this. I thought I was interested in this kind of stuff because, like, anytime we were at a concert or something, I was always drawn to, the front of house where the sound and lighting consoles were. I always just kind of was like, I was like, what are they doing over there, And I was always interested. So, it felt natural to me. I was like, hey, this is interesting to me. Let's do it. Also, you got to skip the main church service because there were two services. The youth rehearsed during the first service and the youth service was the second hour. So most kids, including ourselves, would, if we weren't going to the youth worship rehearsal, we would go to the first hour with our parents, then go to the second hour youth group. If we helped out with the youth, we wouldn't have to go to that first hour. Hey, so that was good. Next question. What was your first piece of gear? So I actually have taken a different path than some people. Like a lot of folks in this industry and in this world, they've got a band or a church or whatever, and they start buying their own gear and using it for that church, that DJ set up, that band, whatever. I started, again, in this church, in our old building where I first started serving. We just had lyrics and we had sound. So I started learning both of those. When we moved to a new building, we now had lights. So the main service had lights. Technically, there were some in the old building, but they really just turned them on. In the new building, there were enough lights to start to do something with, change some color, etc. Remember, this was before LEDs were really around, okay? And then in the youth room, there was also a pretty full conventional lighting rig that we could use to program stuff and use. And nobody in the church, literally nobody, no one who was serving at least knew anything about lights. As I later learned, there was a guy in the congregation who ran a small lighting company. But he also wasn't really a console guy. And we had these ETC Express consoles. Go ahead and Google it. Awesome silver console, but simplistic, old. But they were a good console. But they were above really where he was on a console because he used much simpler stuff. Leprechaun consoles. We'll get to that in a minute. So the first stuff that I got to use would have been those ETC Express consoles. Then in my high school, we had the Lehigh something or other, which was basically, I don't want to say a knockoff of the Express, but it was a knockoff of the Express. And that poor thing crashed too. It was sad. So, the ETC Express, Expression, Insight, those consoles, those ETC consoles were what I learned first in lighting. Gear-wise, we used a lot of Source 4 powers and Source 4s. Then when I started my first job, we'll get to that in a minute, we had a lot of par cans, a whole lot of par cans, because at the time that was the rage, and that was when I got into LEDs. Let's look at the next question. Where did I get my first instruction on stage lighting? I gotta tell you, especially in the early days for me of learning lighting, there was not a lot of instruction that went my way. There really wasn't. So I started at this church. We moved into this new facility with all these lights, and no one knew how to operate them. So in the main service, when for the first year or two we were there, they literally just had like house lights on, and they'd bring the stage up for the service. They may not have even done that much. They may have just left it up all the time. It wasn't very exciting. Okay. And in the youth, it was kind of the same thing. We had all these lights. None of them had any color in them. They were just white. They weren't pointed well. And we just rolled with it because we didn't know any better. Then along came a guy who started, he said, oh, he found out somehow, I don't know how, that the youth really didn't have anybody like helping them with the audio, help mentoring them. And he saw the lighting and he said, well, we can at least add some colors there. So this guy stepped in. His name was Scott. He's still around. And he was an AV integrator at the time. Helped a lot with the church's installation, but he didn't realize that the youth group didn't have any color in their lights, no gels, and the lights weren't pointed right. And so he graciously offered, said, hey, could you, David, come in with me? I think is how this worked, and helped me to point those lights in better directions. Taught me what gel was, showed me how we could put colors in the lights. And then, eventually over time, this guy would, put me in charge basically and say, okay, here's the colors, here's the lights, here's what we could do with them, here's some gobos. They started buying some gobos to put in the lights to get some textures around. And he would just ask me, hey, where do you want to put this? Where do you want to point it? And I would experiment. And that was huge for me. That continued on to me interning at this church. And they had a tech director at that time finally, which they needed the whole time, but they didn't have, right? And still a good friend of mine today. And the tech director really didn't know anything about lighting either. And so at the time, now he knows a lot more. But at the time he didn't. And he would let me just go up in the catwalks and work with the lighting and improve upon it. And it wasn't hard to improve because honestly, the initial setup didn't really fit the church's needs very well. So we'd maybe move the choir or something like that, and he'd have me relight the choir. Neither of us really knew what we were doing, but again, trial and error. He and the other guy showed me how to do things safely, and from there, I figured out the artistic part. Literally, just like light the choir, light this area of the stage, light that area of the stage, get down from the catwalk. Ooh, there's a really bright spot there, really dark spot there. Yikes, and I'd fix it and I'd figure it out, and so along the way since then, I've had some really great teachers. No formal education, but just a lot of people that, as I've done jobs over the years, they educated me. So whether it was my first job, my boss there taught me a lot about power, about setting up lighting rigs, about how to run lights for bands and really make it look good. And I got to do that kind of stuff. Later on, I learned how to program moving lights. And I had a shop graciously in town here in Nashville. I was working in their warehouse, and they said, hey, if you want to learn how to program these hog consoles, if you want to learn how to program moving lights, come in. Come in on a day off. We won't pay you, but we'll let you use the stuff for free that's in the shop. Learn how to program. And from there, my boss there, eventually I worked there full time. He taught me a lot about programming. I'd go out on shows with him to be the lighting tech, and I'd watch his programming. I'd look at his show files. I'd see how he did things and learn. And I really did learn the hard way. I didn't have the resources we have today, like I make and other folks make, to be able to have, that level of education of like, here's what you do. There was none of that. It was like, let's try things. And then, I'd be lighting a county fair or something, and the band's tour manager would come over and say, hey, stop flashing that light like that. It's not helping anyone, And that's how I learned. Really. Next question. What type of event, last question, was your first live show? First live show per se would probably be a church service. In that youth group, I put in literally thousands of hours running audio, working with lights, running lights. I learned so much there just by experimenting and, had the adults show me how to do things safely. Then I experimented, and they really gave me the resources to do so. Then we had high school theater. So that was the first maybe show with paying customers at it. And then my first paid gigs were definitely for that small production company. I believe it was the Reading Fair in Reading, Pennsylvania. You know, the first night the boss takes me out there, you know, we set everything up. He runs the show, I run the spotlight. The next night it's me running the show and a guy came along to run the spotlight, right? And then, you know, we have that experience where the band's tour manager says, hey, stop doing that, you know, do this. And I just learned by being told, right? Learned by, hey, you know, somebody saying that didn't work, or I'd try things. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it would look bad, good, and learn. And yeah, that was my first show. So I hope this video has helped you out, helped you guys out, get to know me a little better. Obviously, there's a lot of my story that I couldn't cover there, but should get you to know me a little bit better. If you have any other questions, comments, thoughts, want to share about your lighting, hop in the comments below. Let us know. If you're starting with lighting, grab my free guide to begin with lighting over at learnstagelighting.com. And also check out our gear link at the top of learnstagelighting.com. If you're looking to purchase gear, we want to help you get a personalized price and make the right recommendation for your needs. So if any of that sounds good to you, check out the links and we'll see you in our next video, as long as you're subscribed. Thanks.